Yeah.
My lords, nearly 100 years ago, my grandfather was an Olympic athlete. In 1932, he asked for time off work to travel to New York and onwards to Los Angeles on the Olympic train alongside all the other European participants. He didn't win a medal, but his performance was featured in the cover story of Track Stats magazine last March. Known as Flying Fuller, he was Britain's fastest man. Now, back then, sport was the amateur game. When he was alive, he told me how the noble Lord Burleigh, dropped the baton in the 4x100 relay. It was a shame because he told me they'd practiced the handover in the changing rooms beforehand. It was different times, the epoch of the gentleman amateur. And I mention all of this because sport is grounded in people, in community, clubs, the fellowship of teams, the tension of individual competition. It's the great leveller. And we can be proud that Britain has codified many of the great global sports. So I know why this bill is here. The bill's here because the promoters of the truly global events have lobbied for it. I know because I've spoken to some of them. They have their sports rights to defend. They have signed up the big global brands. There are pallet loads of merchandise to shift. And they've told the government that unless they pass this bill, we'll never get another sporting event in our nation. It's nonsense. And that's what I would say if I was them. But we've been suckered by that. Because money often follows sport, but sport cannot be and should not be only about the money. Because what this bill does is make sport all about the money by law. Now, it will be said that we've had similar bills before and in the Olympics, and you'd be right, and a completely bespoke effort was needed and justified. But the Olympics in 2012 was the exception, not the rule. And this bill will make the exception the rule in an unwanted and unwarranted unnecessary intrusion into our sporting and cultural life. And because each event is different, we'll most likely need special purpose bills for the Crown Jewels events anyway. Now, I'm not against these bills. I welcome the Euro 28 tournament. There will be circumstances and scope which will need to be negotiated. And if this bill pertained to Euro 28 alone, it would have my full support. And as Baroness Gray-Thompson said earlier in this debate, we don't need legislation for many of these events. But providing an evergreen framework, perversely, all this bill does is give away any and all negotiating leverage that we may otherwise have, and especially as Baroness Davies, who isn't in her place, has observed, we could end up bidding against ourselves. It prompts promoters to ask for even more. And counterintuitively, it weakens our ability to land these events because game theory tells you that. Now, it's been said that this bill is just a one-off like the World Cup or the Euros, and that's not what the bill provides for, because as other laws, including the noble Lord Wood, whose comments I'd like to associate myself with, says, it's all a bit woolly. The press notices talk about the big tournaments, but it could end up to the international table tennis, or where there's a fuzzy boundary between sport and entertainment, and wrestling and boxing has been mentioned. All of these are less lustrous than the Crown Jewels. If we pass this bill unamended, then the Rugby Internationals or the Ryder Cup, that Baroness Nye, who's not in her place either, they will all clamour to be included. They're already asking, it's a slippery slope. And that's where I have my problem with this bill, but also with the comments made by Baroness Evans, who seeks to expand the scope still further. Because there's a mission creep here that trespasses on the grittiness, the sweat, the highs and lows, and the visceral untidiness of sport. I'm concerned because there are powers to designate zones around stadiums or other undefined places where trading will be made illegal. So I asked the promoter of one of these events how far that exclusion zone may extend. And he said, well, certainly between the transport interchanges and the stadium. That was his minimum expectation. So, my lords, just consider that 10-minute walk from Twickenham Station to the Alliance Stadium down Whittam Road in southwest London. Every type of food from around the world is available from licensed food vans and stalls set up in front gardens where enterprising homeowners have demolished their garden walls. Old boys selling memorabilia in tat, the little guy with his roadside kebab van, or the youth club with their pop-up gazebo frying chicken wings for a couple of hours before the game. That's part of the grittiness. It adds to the day's pleasure. And yet it is going to be made illegal upon pain of a £50,000 fine, even if they have a licence. Yes, a fine for the burger flippers from the Cubs and Scouts, raising money for the Jamboree, or for the homeowner who's going to be doubly burdened by the mansion tax. You see, under this legislation, only expensive cardboard burgers, plastic tat and gassy lager sold in soulless, overpriced stadium concourse concessions will be permitted. There are other provisions in this bill to prevent online trading by mobile phone or other internet device at an event. It seems to me that this amounts to a ban on closing out a bet on a game in progress from your seat, in an affront to the fan who likes a flutter. As most apps are based in Gibraltar, I'm not quite sure how it would be enforced anyway. But it gets worse, and I associate my comments with Lord Wood. It will be illegal to pass on a ticket to a friend if your plan changes. Say mum's fallen over at home or whatever. We all want to avoid the bots. But frankly, the ticket sellers and the organisers haven't worked hard enough to stop the scammers hoovering up all the tickets. So rather than sorting this omission at source, the government is going to go after the little guy. If this bill is passed, where will be the incentive to fix this problem? Instead, the fan is going to be forced to surrender tickets to the organisers, who can then resell them for whatever they like, as indeed we've heard in the FIFA World Cup, and by outlawing peer-to-peer platforms like StubHub along the way. I've been told by one of the organisers of one of these Crown Jewels events that fans will be able to surrender their tickets as little as 30 minutes before the game. All that's going to do is encourage hopefuls to turn up at the turnstiles and then be disappointed when 10 minutes before the game there isn't a ticket to buy. You couldn't make it up. If organisers and ticket marketers tried harder on the initial ticketing, we wouldn't need these provisions at all. And I need to ask the fundamental question, what's so bad about exposing for sale an event ticket, the words in the bill, to your Facebook friends? What's so bad that that justifies a £50,000 fine? I also want to know how this legislation will dovetail into the government's consultation on banning 0 hours. At committee, I plan to introduce a carve-out for sporting events, because there are no guaranteed hours in sport, and Fergie time tells you that. Now look, I'm not going to go on about unauthorised association, but it's so loosely defined, it could affect a bed and breakfast operator simply suggesting they're not far from the event, or the struggling pub running a tournament sweepstake. This bill will sanitise sport, restrict choice, increase costs and damage the enjoyment of the day. Why can't we see this harms, not strengthens our negotiating power? And why have we got it in for the Scouts and Guides raising money for the Jamboree, the bloke who prefers a cheap kebab to an overpriced burger, the bucket hat rather than the baseball cap, the fan who fancies ale rather than lager, or the geezer who just wants to play an in-game bet from the comfort of his seat in the middle of the game? Why are we on the wrong side of our sporting life? This bill is unnecessary. Last week, the Financial Times asserted that the Premier League is a national asset, and they're right. And it's become so without the unnecessary provisions from this bill. It's a sledgehammer to miss a nut, and it is going to reduce the simple enjoyment of the small pleasures of going to the game. Now, I know that part of sport is knowing where you're beaten. And I can tell from the House this evening I'm not going to win this one. But I've made my point. We must guide against mission creep. We must get the balance between the private interest and the public good right. Because if we fail to do so, then the fans at Old Trafford, at Anfield, and those other places where, like Saudi Arabian Gulf, will tell you the unintended consequences of putting the money first and the fans second.